Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cloud Native Live for today, January 14th. This is an event in which we bring all the different people who help make Cloud Native to come and talk about how everything's done and kind of talk about the details and get into the weeds about how all this works. This is a CNCF stream, and as such, is governed by the Code of Conduct, which basically boils down to please be respectful to each other. You have the opportunity to ask questions that we'll pass on to the presenters here today. And so if you're doing that, please just be respectful of people, and we'll go ahead and get started from there. So I am pleased to introduce both Kamal and Michael, and I'll let them introduce themselves more. Who'll be talking a lot about some really interesting topics around open core and software as a service. So let's go ahead and kick into that. So Kamal, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello everyone. I'm Kamal Gupta. I'm one of the founders here at Omnistrate. I started my journey back at AWS. Spent 12 years building more than half a dozen cloud services, and then I met Michael at Confluent, where we worked together in building the Kafka cloud and much more. Took the company to IPO. And one of the things that in our experiences that we have seen time and time again is how the journey of going from open source to open core and what it takes and the challenges we went through along the way. Every time we have replicated this journey, and we'd love to share and exchange thoughts here with the audience.
And hello, everybody. I'm Michael Cooper. Feel always a little odd joining an open source conference because I spent the first 10 to 15 years of my life over at Microsoft. But I have been a convert since. So I joined Kamal and team at Confluent way back when, had a lot of fun there. And since then, I've worked for a number of open core based projects over the years, including Astronomer, which was taking care of Apache Airflow. Through the course of our work at Omnistrate, we work with a lot of open core projects in general. With that, I want to turn it over to our friend and colleague, Bill Tarr from the AWS.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, thanks, Michael. I'm excited to be here. This is a really cool opportunity for me. I've been a big fan of CNCF for a long time, of open source, of open core. It's been a big part of my journey at AWS. And my journey at AWS has been about 5 years working for a team called the AWS SaaS Factory. So during my time at the SaaS Factory, we spent a lot of time working with startup customers at AWS, helping them on their SaaS journey. And as Michael said, a lot of these companies have very interesting journeys of how they get from open source into SaaS. I've worked with SaaS companies that took like 6 months to get from open source into a full SaaS product. I think what I'm most excited to talk about today is how companies like Omnistrate are accelerating that journey, about how open source customers are finding faster ways to get to market, reaching open core or full SaaS solutions. And I think we'll probably dive a little bit into that and what the differentiation is as we talk. But yeah, it's been a really interesting journey for me in terms of SaaS and open source and how they fit together. And to me, this is the biggest question we've got in SaaS right now, is how does this question evolve, and how do people who are building open source products and thinking about how to monetize them right now arrive at a profitable solution. And again, I come from a startup background myself, just like the other two guys on the call. So I think this is something that's near and dear to my heart, not just open source, but how do we help startup founders to succeed and build profitable solutions while making the open source community richer as well. So great to meet you all.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro there. So we'll let you all just dive into this and talk through. This is an interesting topic. A lot of times we're talking about very specific projects or things, and this is a really interesting one because it's talking about, hey, open core and open source, which is a common thing here. So I'll let you guys dive into that, and we'll be, like I said before, if you're just joining into the stream and missed this, if you have any questions, please leave them in the various chat mechanisms that are available, and we'll see those here, and we'll make sure those questions get answered here. So we'll let you all take it away.
So with that, I do have a couple of questions from my colleagues on this call. The first one, kind of the elephant in the room, and I'll kick that over to you, Bill, here first, is when we're dealing with open source and open core, one of the most common questions I got at my decade plus at Microsoft, as well as in helping a number of companies get move their projects into the cloud, is, are the clouds here to help? And so I know Microsoft has its opinion here, and they're saying yes. But from the AWS perspective, can you talk about, how and why can an open source project, trust or depend or look at AWS or Microsoft or Google? Are you here to help, or are you friend or foe? What's the story here?
Yeah, and Michael, it is a complex equation for a lot of companies, understanding how to, I would say, partner with the cloud providers. And I think for an interesting example, I consider you partners of AWS. And it isn't to say that there aren't any solutions AWS might build that might not in some way compete or have differentiated offers from what Omnistrate is offering themselves. But I think when we think about what you're building, it's going to be different than anything AWS can offer. It's going to be differentiated. And to me, this is really the story for anyone who's building a startup open source project. How is your story differentiated? How can how do you add value to the community in addition to what someone could install with just an open source product? Why can't I just go to the Apache product, download it, and put it into my own cloud and run it, and nobody needs to be the wiser? The answer is it's pretty hard. So as an open source founder, you're adding value to the product that you've built or that you've open sourced or that's been open sourced already. Making sure that that differentiation is publicly knowledgeable, is easily recognizable, really makes a cloud provider your partner. You are adding something to their general ecosystem of what they're offering to their customers, regardless of whether or not there might be also service versions even of an open source product. Even that doesn't mean that there can't be some cooperation between the cloud provider and the open source provider. And there's tons of examples of this out there if you want to take a look at MongoDB and Grafana and Supabase. Lots of different providers out there who may even have AWS service versions of the underlying open source project that are still strong partners with AWS, with Microsoft, with any of the other cloud providers. And that's because they have differentiated offerings, things that help our mutual customers. So Michael, going back to your question, I think this is something that the cloud providers realized maybe 10 years ago, that there was some early tension between open source and what the cloud providers were doing, and that resolving that was in the mutual interest of our customers. Finding ways to encourage people to build open source products, to make them profitable, make them commercial open source products, while still maintaining services core to our customers, weren't mutually exclusive. So finding ways to partner with your cloud providers, finding ways to show your differentiated value so that we can sell to our customers with you is better than simple competition. So this is where the partner organization within AWS really focuses. How do we partner with the people who are building products that are differentiated for our customers? How do we go to market with them? And even if there is some cooperation type activity in there, it's still valuable. And nobody is out there saying, Confluent isn't valuable because AWS has a managed version of Kafka. Confluent is still an amazing AWS partner, as is MongoDB with their Atlas product. Showing that differentiation with even offerings of the cloud providers themselves really sets you a bar above and makes you a great partner. Hopefully that long answer somewhere in there for you open source startup founders, you can see the answer is it's better to cooperate. It's better to be a partner. And even if there is some competition, really that's not the defining aspect of what we're building.
No, I couldn't have said it more, and I couldn't agree more. Couldn't have said it better, and I couldn't agree more, Bill. I think the differentiation right now from what I'm seeing in terms of a successful open source player moving to having a SaaS offer versus non-successful is whether or not you're leaning in and finding a way to partner with the clouds. The difference between the ones that are successful and the ones that are not are the ones who are leveraging all the goodness that the cloud partnerships will bring versus the ones that are not. And as you said, it's complicated. It's not easy. It's not an overnight thing. It's not an easy button. It's work to be done, but it has to happen.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, if I may just quickly add, right, like to what Bill was saying, is when we talk about differentiation, it may not be just a differentiation in terms of product and feature and technology. It could just be a differentiation on the operational SaaS and the operational support and the automation that you have put together, and your understanding of the open source software, that your expertise that you're bringing it in, and you're providing more value to the customer. So at the end of the day, that value could be a function of more enterprise features. It could be some other integration or partnership with other SaaS vendors out there, but it could also be the operational automation and execution that you have built together, and your understanding of the underlying software. So I think when Bill was talking about differentiation, it's important to understand that the differentiation can have different flavors, and how you provide your value, your differentiation in terms of value to your customers. That how part is, it could come in different flavors.
So if we go back to the original topic, and we did choose the title here fairly specifically. We did say open core, not open source. And so, Kamal, do you kind of want to walk through kind of the difference there and why that subtle nuance of the open core versus open source matters, and what the trends we're seeing in companies bringing open core based projects to market?
Yeah, so when I think about open source, right, open source, I feel like it's more of a distribution. We're trying to get a community fit for people to participate in your goal or in your project, and finding a product market fit where people find it useful to use. But that's different from open core, where you're trying to find a value market fit, where you're trying to basically validate whether somebody will pay, and there's a viable business for it, and enough value proposition being translated to the other businesses that they will be ready to pay. So to me, open core is a business model, and open source more of a distribution model. And open core is basically trying to monetize essentially through different value proposition mechanism, how you can take an open source and monetize that. Right, and so that's fundamentally how it's seen. I'd love to see if Michael, you or Bill want to weigh into that, and I'm happy to circle back on the second part of the question.
Well, I think, Bill, I think this leads to the natural next question for you, which is differentiation. So how do you add value, and what are from the companies you're seeing doing this well, what value are they adding on top of open source to bring to add that commercial value?
That's a great question, Michael, because it is a little differentiated across the different types of products. For some, it's simply the ability to manage the infrastructure. And this is particularly true for infrastructure SaaS. I would not want to, I've worked with a company called Aerospike. That's a great, very fast database. You can install Aerospike on your own EC2 servers in AWS. It's relatively easy to do. They've got all the instructions. Burn those EC2 down if you're not careful. You have to understand how to set up Aerospike because it is so high speed. It runs in memory. Setting it up wrong is a recipe for failure. So simply the knowledge of how to properly configure Aerospike for the Aerospike cloud product is more than enough of a differentiating factor. Now, they have other differentiating factors as well. But in that case, I'd say really that is it. I don't want to manage Aerospike. I don't want to understand how the EC2s are optimally set up and which instance to pick and how to set those up and when to change those and dynamically scale them. I'd like them to worry about those problems. And that's particularly true for infrastructure SaaS, which includes streaming, which includes databases and other types. But there's other types of SaaS out there, of course. And even the more traditional SaaS offerings, where you're perhaps using them through a web browser, there, I think features really are the differentiating factor. Having the open core product that is not just the open source that you can already buy, but having some additional features on top that you offer, whether those are simply making management easier, perhaps surfacing the configurations out through the browser so that an admin user with a specific role can go in and make changes for other users. That might be enough of a differentiating factor. But you also might put behind the gated wall some additional features, like perhaps AI ML features, right? The ability to use your product, but then also perhaps use Gen AI to ask questions of your data within the platform. all of those might be differentiating factors. Again, a lot of this comes from the understanding of what are your customers willing to pay for. What takes those people who are already using the open source product and make them say, this is great, but it would be great if someone else managed it for me, or if I could have different experiences than what I can get by myself through the open source product. I think those are all differentiating factors. There's probably even more, but those are the two big categories that I sort of see it emerging from the products that I've worked with.
And I think that leads to the next logical transition, which is, what value add are we adding? And to that, we want to talk about the difference between using an open source software on AWS within an AWS IaaS versus using an open core based SaaS. And one of the biggest difference between software and SaaS is this thing called control plane, and offering your customer a control plane to manage, like you said, that infrastructure and pieces that you don't necessarily want to do. And so, Kamal, can you kind of walk us through, what is a control plane? Obviously, that's something near and dear to your heart, because that's what Omnistrate does for a living. What is a control plane, and why does adding a control plane to an open core project or an open core SaaS thing kind of transition from open source software to an open core business?
Absolutely. When we think about control plane, it's a one way of thinking about it is the kind of a management plane that allows businesses to run and operate their cloud services at scale. Now, what does that entail? That entails few elements. One of them is when we thinking about selling a software and application at scale, we have to manage the customers or tenants. So that the whole concept of tenant management has to be embraced somewhere. We then have to think about how to deploy applications across all sorts of configurations in different regions, across different network settings, different security configurations, different parameters, different type of infrastructures. And so how do you now provide that flexibility? Because remember, one size doesn't fit all here. And when you are trying to sell your application to thousands and millions of deployments, you will come across wide variety of them, and supporting them in a way that is operationally sustainable is what is one of the challenges. And how do you do that at scale? And it's just not a matter of just doing the deployment, because now that's just the start. Because now you got into you manage your customers, you manage your deployments, but then what happens after the deployment, right? And you have to go through all the challenges from scaling to observability to providing patching and upgrades. And when cloud infrastructure, new type of hardware comes out, how do you roll that out? Dealing with billing, and how do you do marketplace integration? How do you do availability or do backups of your software? How do you deal with security? How do you get your compliance? And now you started thinking about the whole day one and day two aspects of it, and doing that at scale with across different clouds, different regions, different type of networking configuration. It becomes a kind of a operating system in itself. And how do you then build that? Now, the question is, obviously, nothing is rocket science. You can, successful companies like Confluent and Databricks and Snowflake and MongoDB, and a lot of companies like Couchbase, they all have done that, and tens of hundreds. But at what cost? Right? And all of these companies have to take hundreds of engineers from their core differentiated application to put it on something called building control plane, and have to go through this something called SaaS stuff. I don't know, it's a concept in SaaS very well familiar. Just to 10-second version of it for the audience here, which is in order to be in SaaS to be profitable, you have to essentially in the initial phases you have to invest a lot of operational cost. And so traditionally what has happened is the higher your growth is initially, the more cost you have to pay, and you're actually operating a negative margin, and with the hoping that eventually you will build your control plane and then you will go positive. And what we are trying to do here is really just make it not have that compromise, like not have to trade off between their growth and running out of cash and margin. So we want to change the world where customers can really be profitable from customer one, their customer one, and can grow and don't have to wait for 2 years of innovation building this control plane, which is not even their core into differentiation. And the reality is that it's not just the Michael, well, this just from your experiences as well, right? Like it's not just those 2 years; it's just forever. You keep pouring in resources. It's not like the control plane is its thing, and you have to. That operating system is not dormant or it's not. It's stagnant. In many ways, the environment is changing around it. The cloud is constantly adding new services. They are changing their infrastructure. The new regulatory requirements are coming around. The experiences that customers are demanding are the expectation is changing. Especially like we saw the trend with AI, and now the expectation that people have from the experiences point of view are changing. So all of these dynamic factors, and you yourself are innovating, and because you're bringing in new application, you are adding new features. All of this comes in. The aspects of the control plane will have to continuously have to be maintained in order to provide the best-in-class experience for your customers. So, that becomes a thing in itself. You end up in, in our experiences, moving 1/3 of your engineering R&D on focusing on something which is not even core to your business. And that's what we are after, at least at Omnistate, to make it really simple for everyone to not worry about the undifferentiated pieces and focus on getting their application, be profitable from customer one, and get going on day one.
Love it. So Bill, we've got our first question, and it's a question I like a lot, and a question I'm sure you hear a lot. So I saw you smirk when it came in as well. And so Kamal laid out pretty well for us. What's the difference between running software on cloud versus running a SaaS? And the core difference is you have a control plane that's doing a lot of the automation, provisioning, and all the rest of the stuff for you. So you have your control plane and your data plane in a SaaS environment. Now we've got this thing called AI. So is AI replacing SaaS, or does AI need SaaS? Does AI need a control plane? So Bill, I'm sure you get this question a lot. Is SaaS still relevant in the world of AI?
I think Ashish, thank you. It's a great question. And it really is a great question. People always say, oh, it's a great question. This is a really great question. This might be the question of the year. And I'm already seeing posts on LinkedIn, is SaaS dead? Is AI going to take over? Everyone sort of probably has seen by now the Satya from Microsoft interview talking about, how business apps are going to transform, and people kind of drop the label on that SaaS is dead, that Satya is saying SaaS is dead, coming from the operator of maybe one of the largest business app SaaS companies. Office 365 is one of the largest SaaS applications in the world. So if you put that label on that interview, it sounds really damning. But I think if anyone wants to go back and listen to that interview, what Satya is really saying is that SaaS is going to transform, that how we deliver software, how software is built is going to transform. And this is really where we're rotating in terms of SaaS and how we think about SaaS. There's a few different ingredients. One, AI is already incredibly important for SaaS. Creating features based on Gen AI, based on just general AI to add value to your customers is essential. If you're building a SaaS product now, thinking about what your customers might be able to gain value from the data that you have on their behalf using Gen AI is probably the most critical thing you should be thinking about right now. If you're not doing it, someone else is going to be doing it, and they're going to be competing with you on that front. It may not be profitable right now. This is another factor that's really interesting with cutting edge technologies. You might not make money selling this feature for quite some time, but you still have to be working on it and thinking about it. And not just because AWS is going to be making money on that, mind you. That's not why I'm suggesting that. It is a differentiating factor, and understanding whether there's real value for your customers in these features or not. And whether you're going to be able to monetize them is the first part of the AI journey that I really want to stick a pin in and make sure that everyone's rotating on right now with their current SaaS products. Getting further into what Satya said, he specifically was talking about the business logic that lives behind business apps, which is, again, a category of SaaS, right? So there is infrastructure SaaS, there's business application SaaS, there's a number of different flavors of SaaS. And he really dug into that and said, listen, I think AI is going to become a module that moves around between business applications. So, he is envisioning this world where your AI kind of moves with you. These agentic AI modules move between applications, which is pretty cool. I like the proposition. I don't think we're there yet. I think that's going to take a while for that to evolve, but it is evolving. And if you're thinking about that, if you're in that world, think about what that means. What does it mean to have AI that sort of moves through you and some knowledge that kind of floats through the world? And the third part of that, and this is probably the most interesting part for me, AI requires lots of data. What data are you accumulating in your SaaS solution? And how can AI interact with that data to surface new information? This is where AI is really going to change the face of what SaaS is. Your SaaS application may surface in different places. What you are building right now and surfacing as a general SaaS application through a browser might be harder to do now that your customer's data is required to operate all the AI that you're trying to generate. You might have to deploy your SaaS application in different ways. We use the term SaaS anywhere to describe this, and we'll get more into this, believe me, in terms of what this means for the control plane. But in general, your SaaS application might have to be deployed into your customers' accounts. It might have to be deployed into Salesforce. It might have to be deployed into somebody's data lake. It's all sorts of different ways that the data that drives AI is going to transform the way we think about SaaS deployments. But jumping all the way back to the original question, will AI replace SaaS? My answer is no. SaaS is a deployment model. It's still how we think about how we manage all of these different versions of the applications that we're putting out there. I think AI will be a flavor of SaaS. I think AI will be parts of different flavor of SaaS. It's going to transform everything we do, but this is more of an iteration than a replacement. We're still going to need to monetize everything we do. We're still going to need to manage all of the deployments we've got out there. We're still going to have day two operations where we worry about what happens after we've built and deployed this thing out to customers. How are we managing it? How are we updating it? What do those experiences look like? And those conversations all come back to a control plane. We still have this concept of a control plane that removes the operational burden from our tenants. The people who are consuming our software don't want to be thinking about how to get to the next version. They want to shift that burden onto us as SaaS providers. Our ability to successfully do that in this next generation of SaaS is why I still consider the next generation to be SaaS. People still don't want to take on that operational burden when they don't have to. You may have to shift some of that burden to them if software is running in their accounts or if it's running in data lakes or Snowflake, but we still want to shift as much of the burden of that to the left and take as much of that on. This is where the control plane is still really key. And if you ask me if there's a differentiation to what is SaaS, it very much is the control plane. If you're doing open core and you're simply throwing things over the wall into customer accounts and they're managing it, that's not SaaS and selling. And that's fine. That's a model that can be successful for some companies. If you want to scale, if you want to grow, if you want your customers to be satisfied with what you're doing, you want to shift more into that SaaS model. Start with your control plane. Think about how you can remove as much of that management burden from your customers as possible. That's why this is still SaaS, even though AI is critical to every single aspect of what we're doing in SaaS now. Long answer, but hopefully that answers your question, Ashish, at least from my perspective.
I think that was a great answer. And so, Kamal, Bill just talked a little bit about the evolution of SaaS deployment models and having to actually take your app, especially your AI app, to your customers, to the data, and not expecting the data to the app. And so when Salesforce and the rest came out, they came out with these apps, and we just freely sent all of our data to Salesforce. And then it turns out they were training on our data, and now we're saying no, data doesn't leave our control. And so, as it relates to SaaS control models and helping or taking your app to the data versus expecting your data to go to the app, how does the control plane help with that? How is that hard? And kind of what are the trends are you seeing there, Kamal? So what's next in that deployment model? And go ahead.
Yeah, traditionally, if you go back a few years ago, one of the popular models for the SaaS was where SaaS was essentially hosted as in a fully hosted model. Now the tenant isolation could be at the application level, could be at the container level, could be at the machine or network or Kubernetes. There are different flavors of it, but it was all hosted as a more or less in the service provider's account. And everything was, so the customers basically, and there was a valid reason for that. I think the intuition and the experience over there was customers shouldn't worry about infrastructure or even getting and provisioning a cloud provider account. They don't need, all they need is an internet connection to just get the value out of the software, right? And that made sense. Now, what has happened though in the last couple of years with the growth of the AI, it more like, when we think about from the enterprise perspective, right, makes very little sense to take the entire company's proprietary data and like we all know the world is going to be full of agents. And let's say if I'm using hundreds and thousands of agents to drive and power my business, it makes no sense for me to ship the entire proprietary data and being able to trust hundreds and thousands of startups to be able to just take and operate on the confidential data I have and get the value out of them, right? And so there's a lot of risk that is associated with them. And so what has happened in the last 2 years as a result of it, the SaaS has, and this goes back to the point what Bill was saying, which is SaaS has adapted itself to the new requirements of what AI needs. And so a lot of the AI company, when they come to us at Omnistrate and talk to us, or even our discussions with AWS and with Bill, we see time and time again where people are shifting towards bring your own account model or bring your own VPC model, where customers or the enterprises are keeping the data in their account and they're asking the service provider to bring their application or agents to be deployed in their account so that they can harness the value and provide the value within the account without leaving any PII information out of their account. And so that gives that allows these enterprises to take advantage of all the innovation happening in the world without compromising on the security and taking on the risk associated with distributing this data models to everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to jump in on that because Kamal, going back to the open core, because we're starting to get into the AI direction a little bit, which is important. But I think one of the things you just talked about too with the open core, I wanted to make sure we didn't miss. One of the reasons I love open core in this new world that we're talking about is a lot of the software, even if we manage it as SaaS, will be deployed into customer accounts. And putting yourselves into the boots of a CTO or a CIO of a financial service company or a healthcare customer. If I told you I built some software, I wanted to deploy it into your accounts and it's going to have access to all of your PII, wouldn't you like to look at the source code and know what's actually going on in this application? If I just say, yeah, trust me, I wrote a database, it's perfectly safe, all the encryption is in place, everything's awesome, you don't have to worry about this is great, just drop it into your account and it's going to run. I mean, I think that would be a pretty hard sell. And this is where I really see open core as part of SaaS becoming a differentiating factor. I don't think it's simply, hey, it's open core versus SaaS. And I think that's where people kind of make this distinction that I think is a little bit of just a false flag. This is an area where SaaS as a model can help to make open core a better distribution model. But the open core side of this is just as important. If you're selling to large customers, I've seen over and over again, large customers pushing back, especially in FSI and in financial services, where customers are saying, listen, I like your product. It's great. We won't buy it as SaaS that deploys into your accounts. You have to figure out how to put this into our accounts. And if you just simply give it to them and put it into their accounts, you lose all of the benefits of SaaS and they lose all of the benefits of SaaS. Now they have to manage this and they have to figure out how to operate it and they have to keep the versions up to date. And now you're supporting versions that are 8 versions old, which is the world we came from before SaaS. How do you take that experience and make it as SaaS-y as possible, right? To make it as painless for your customer and as painless for you. This is where open core really sets itself apart for me. If I'm sitting in that FSI, in that CTO's chair, I'm looking at this and saying, look, I can point my developers to the code. They can look through and see exactly what it's doing, figure out where this is coming from, understand the compliance story. And trust what you told me about compliance. I could have my compliance guys look through this code line by line and tell me exactly where my code is going. I don't have to trust you. I trust my people and their understanding of the code. And now I'm willing to let you operate this software on my behalf. I say, okay, I can see the version you're deploying to me. I will let you push out new versions or tell Kubernetes to pull down the latest version for the repository where you dropped it, because I have absolute visibility into everything that you're doing. We can participate in this community. We can approve changes and see new changes that are coming into the software. So these two worlds really come together. And Kamal, what you said was really important there, that this deployment into customer accounts is not antithetical to SaaS. It's part of SaaS. It's part of this evolution of deploying software. And the control plane is very much at the core of that. Right? We want to keep that control plane even in this new world, managing all these different implementations of software. But with open core, it provides more trust and allows us to get into those doors that might be closed to us otherwise. Even if we do have to deploy into their accounts, we can still treat this as SaaS. So I want to make sure we connected those dots back together, because to me,
and to your point, right? Couldn't agree more. And you're absolutely right. Like as you pointed out, right? Like just to even go one level deeper, people have to worry about there is no sharing of secrets. People have to worry about there is no unencrypted data being transferred. People have to worry about there is no opening of the firewall required on the enterprise side. I mean, you can't expect an enterprise to say, okay, I'm going to just keep opening the firewall for every single agentic application that I need to deploy. Not going to happen. People have to worry about providing that all the security framework of access control and making sure the API keys and all the right the encryption at disk or at rest or in transit, all of those aspects as part of the application. And that's where the differentiation of the open core comes in from open source. And like, if you're not going to have that, right, that's to your point, then you're just taking a software and just handing it over. That's not really a SaaS. And so that aspect of the fact that you made it secure and made it one click and provided that level of experience that even the financial services or regulatory environments have the comfort of basically doing a one click and not have to make a trade-off between the experience and security is a value proposition.
Yeah, and one thing I would actually answer in here as a question. I think I know the answer from listening to this from all of you, but I think it's a good one to ask is, I've been involved in the CNCF for a very long time, and one of the concerns that always comes up, especially in the past few years, is all the things around licensing and all that stuff. And so I think to answer the, for lack of a better term, like more open source purists, like this should be like this entirely like free and open thing. Like what's the balance between what I'm going to loosely call ideological open source and the open core model, and how does that tie into what you're saying here? Because I think that's a key distinction some people worry about, especially in this space, given some of the projects that are in this area that had license switches and people felt like rug pulls happen. So I'm curious what your takes are on that kind of question for people in the cloud native community about how is that balanced, and what's kind of the difference between like something that's just a pure open source project versus something that's more fitting into this open core model.
If I can take the first shot at that, and then I'll toss it over to Bill. One of the biggest things that separates pure open source from an open core is support. And so, at 3 o'clock in the morning, if a service is down, is there someone you can call who's responsible and able to do everything necessary to fix it, including write code to address the issue? And so at our time at Confluent, or at our time with other open source / open core businesses, we spent a lot of time and effort and love for the open source project and pushing out open source software. And we supported, and we contributed to that community. But if someone's running if a bank at 3 in the morning is running a project that is entirely open source, even if it's running on top of AWS IaaS, and they have a problem, that is something that they need to solve themselves, or they need to call a consultant. And so the consultant's not responsible for writing code and the rest, they're just going to consult. And so the difference is an SLA and a support agreement is the primary difference between open core and open source. And so even when the project is mostly based on an open source technology, and even if as a community like at Confluent or the rest, we are giving back a lot to that open core technology, we're also on the hook that if something breaks at 3 in the morning, we're there to help and support. And so one thing I do want to actually toss that question, as well as ask Bill to weigh in on, is I don't think we properly introduced Bill in AWS SaaS Factory and what SaaS Factory gives back to the world in terms of, we talked a little bit about control plane and why control plane matters. SaaS Factory is probably kind of the leaders in providing free and open information to anyone who wants to build a control plane and wants to build SaaS. And that's a huge chunk of what they do, is provide that guidance out there. And so, Bill, I do want you to answer that question, but I also want you to give out a shout out for you guys to explain where all these open source developers can look to AWS SaaS Factory for some of that leadership.
Thanks, Michael. And thanks for the opportunity to talk about our team a little bit too. I was far more excited to talk about startups and open source today than really talk about our team. So I didn't in the beginning, but I'm very happy to do it now. First, I do want to talk, Taylor, to a little bit about what you said. And I think one of the keywords you said is licensing. And I know that there's some concern in the open source community about where licensing is headed. There are some open source projects that have gone in a different direction and gone from pure open source licensing and said, hey, we don't want anyone else to be able to commercialize what we built. And I think that there is some risk in that direction. I don't want to undersell that. I think everyone's aware of what the potential story is there for the open source community. But I also think that's a pretty limited path that we're talking about right now. We're only talking about a few companies that have gone down that road, and their software is big and critical, but it is big company software. Like, these are large companies that are managing this. I still think there's a tremendous amount of road for everyone with open source projects to consider to go down the open core products, to leave them open, to leave the licensing open. I don't think everyone should be shifting into more restrictive licensing. It's a very specific choice that certain companies made because of some competition that they saw that really they didn't see as helping the open source project. Whether they're right or wrong, I mean, that's really their choice, and the community can respond to those by forking the open source projects if they want to. And that's exactly the behavior that we've seen. So there's always options in the open source world. Because the software is open source, we have these different options along the tree of life that is the open source software. Just because somebody decides they want to take it in-house, because somebody does something with it, it doesn't mean that other versions of that software, like MariaDB, won't be created and continue to exist out there. So I think the thing that I really love and embrace about open source is it doesn't lead to a single outcome. It doesn't mean because one company does the majority of the work for it, has control over it, that's going to be where it lands and that's your only choice. They make specific choices about how they manage it, and that's fine. While it may affect the open source community, it doesn't mean the open source community doesn't have other options as well for how it wants to deal with those situations. So all of that remains on the table with open source. It's still, to me, all of those advantages far outweigh the disadvantages of if I've chosen an open source software and the open core provider decides, hey, we really don't want to have open licensing and you're competing with a bunch of other companies managing what we're working on. That's not my main concern. I'm still getting so many benefits out of this. And if it comes down to the point where I have to fork that software, so be it. So I think we could go on with that for another 20 minutes. I don't want to do that because we have so many more things to talk about. But I do want to take advantage of the door Michael opened for me here too, and talk a little bit about our team, if you don't mind. It is a very interesting team. Like I said, I've been with AWS 5 years. I've been with the AWS SaaS Factory the whole time. And our team works with SaaS providers. It's a complementary program for our AWS partners. So we're able to help people who are trying to build SaaS, including open source providers, help guide them in the best practices for building SaaS. But perhaps even more importantly than simply the prescriptive guidance that we're providing one-on-one to customers and talking to customers is the tools that we've built. So one of the tools that we built, we call the SaaS Builder Toolkit. And it is a control plane, right? So this is an example of how you can use a control plane to build SaaS and it's very prescriptive. And this is sort of necessarily the thing you do when you're building examples it's a example of building a control plane that's deployed with AWS CDK, our language for deploying infrastructure. And it's, under the hood, it's Python with some JavaScript on the front end of it. It's a great tool. It's a great instructional tool for learning. While some customers do look at it and say, yeah, I think we can take this and actually build a control plane with it. For the most part, it's an instruction kit on how to go and build a control plane. And again, just sort of tying this all back together with the control plane and the acceleration conversation we're having, for some companies, that's the perfect path. Some companies will look at their control plane and say, you know what, our domain is so specific. We really want to have control over our control plane. We want our own deployment story. We're going to write this in Rust. We want to deploy it with Terraform. We want to have all of these specific flavors that fit to our company. And if that's what you want to do, that's awesome. Our team is happy to help you with those conversations. We're happy to work with you on doing all of those things, walk you through the SaaS Builder Toolkit, show you how to implement your application. Now, we call the control plane and the application plane, which you deploy to your customers, as the two parts of SaaS. We can help you deploy that in AWS serverless with Lambdas and DynamoDB, for example, with EKS, with ECS, our different container languages, container platforms. We can do all of those things for you, and it still takes a fair amount of time, even with our help. So this is where there's an interesting sort of dichotomy that's continuing to grow between just going and building these control planes yourself, and of course, tools like Omnistrate that are control plane as a service. So I think that there's an interesting tie-in between what we do as a team, working with large customers who want to invest the time into building their own tools, and perhaps some of the startups on the call today, who I hope are on the call today listening to us, thinking about their open core product and how they get that into SaaS. And I'd want you to look at these different options that are available to you today, including, using the SaaS Builder Toolkit, going out there, looking at what's available. Is this something that's a fit for you? Do you want to go and build a custom control plane? Or do you want to take a look at a tool like Omnistrate that does a lot of this out of the box for you, including deployments into your customer accounts, which is one of those points we talked about earlier. So all of these options, I think, have really emerged over the last year. Or focuses as SaaS Factory over the last year is focusing on the control plane, providing tools for our customers and examples of how to do this, and also working with companies like Omnistrate that offer this as a service. So thanks, Michael. I mean, hopefully that's a good enough explanation for everyone on what SaaS Factory is. Feel free to reach out to me if you do have questions. I'm always happy to have conversations with SaaS providers.
Taylor, that was a really great question, actually, from the open source perspective. I want to throw it back over to you, actually, for maybe one more. From as you live in CNCF on a pretty regular day-to-day basis, what are kind of the core concerns you were seeing that maybe these guys can address on, SaaS or no SaaS, cloud or no cloud, or are the clouds here to help? What are the common concerns or things you're hearing or seeing?
This is why I said I'm pretty sure I know your thoughts on it based on what you had all said. One of those common things is the data locality. AI threw a wrench in it, but things were already heading that way anyway. AI makes it worse because it needs all the context, and that means a lot more information than, like, before. It would have been like, oh, it's this small section of data that's going across. And so I think that's one of those concerns people have around it. And most of it was reflected in my question around what I see most of the time talking to people is they worry about the bait and switch, and they worry about the health of open source and the stability of it. And you have two camps there, which I think those are just, I don't know if there's a perfect answer to, and I'm just curious what you all think is, like, open core is actually one of those solutions to it, right? Because open core is generally supported by one or more businesses, and is therefore most of the developers who are working on it, there's a core that are being paid by a company in many times, as opposed to some open source projects that don't have that. So I think the other question that a lot of people in the CNCF space have is, well, then how do I build these things or integrate insert tool from the CNCF landscape, right? The CNCF landscape is famously a huge thing, to the point of being a meme, right, in the space. But we stay here and are involved in this space because we care deeply about being able to use these different tools and the innovation that comes with it. And so I think it's tied to, which you already answered, I think, the first thing of, like, okay, data management. I think there's some sustainability questions, which is more of an ideological discussion maybe for another time. But then this one is an interesting one, as you say, okay, I'm building this SaaS, but how do you have the proper extension layers and play nicely with these ecosystems that pop up? Like, and we've had many of them before, Patchy, and all those kind of things that happened before we got to things like CNCF as well. And so how do those play nicely? How do those integrate in? And if you are can you run an open core as something like in a software foundation, not even just the CNCF, but any software foundation? So that's kind of, I think, the space that I think a lot of people have questions with. And I see some of the concerns as we talk to people is how it plays in with all of that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And data sovereignty issues and concerns are obviously a big trend for the last couple of years. I don't see that going away. I think that's becoming more and more and a bigger and bigger issue. Kamal, can you talk a little bit about that in terms of especially since, I mean, you've been building open source, especially in the database or cloud services based somewhat on open source technology for longer than almost anyone else I know. Can you kind of talk about those trends?
More specifically, anything in particular? Just to
Yeah, and the data sovereignty issue, as well as you know, how that, you know, just like in the DBAS space, we're continuing to see evolution there. Even though, you know, open source database went out, and, you know, AWS built projects out there, and we see new data vendors, you know, solving data problems on cloud in new and innovative ways using open source technology. We're helping a couple of them even this year with, you know, because AI is now bringing in vector databases. And so every time, you know, we think this new cloud service has solved something, a new innovation happens, and a lot of the innovation is coming from the open source world. And so we're seeing, in my opinion, I'm just consistently seeing a lot of problems in the cloud space being solved by innovative new open source technologies, and then someone, you know, turns that into it commercializes it and brings it to the forefront, and everyone says, hey, you know what, they solved it. You know, was it 5 years ago? Snowflake solved it. It's done. And then we've seen 18 different data projects since. And so I just know that, Kamal, you've been in that, you've seen that evolution. You've been watching that evolution for 15 years. You started that in your early days at AWS. You're helping some of your open source friends do that now. Kind of, you know, what's next in the data space? Why is open source continuing to be relevant in that world?
Yeah, I think this all actually started when my early days at AWS. But DBAS actually was one of the early things. Raju, I remember back in 2009, 2010, one of the VPs of AWS databases started with this, coined this word of DBAS, and really the industry took on that. And I think the basic premise was that there used to be very few databases, and the world was often, and the world basically in the early year of 2010s were torn into basically more or less revolved around the relational databases, to some degree to early days of the NoSQL. And I think the basic premise was that, look, we like applications, databases, and data processing doesn't have to be data processing doesn't have to be limited to a giant piece of software where one size fits all. And the core was to how can you build a right data processing tool for the right job. And that basically changed the trend. Now we see, you know, all kind of data processing applications, and not just from relational and NoSQL, but you go from blockchain to time series databases to, you know, more, you know, real time processing, and you start looking into very specific databases for specific application, essentially, and that's what I'm trying to get to, and that leads to the philosophy of this. But what then happened is, because of that, it solved one problem, which is to create efficient data processing tools for the application. But it created another problem, which is now there is a data isolation, and data is segregated across all of these tools. And now the enterprises in the world are worrying about how do you now unify and aggregate, essentially. And so the new trend in the industry in the last 5 years is to get the best of the both worlds. So where you want the best tool for the best job, but you also don't want to create this data isolation and data islands. And you see a lot of projects like icebergs and Hoodie and things like that in the direction happening. And I think there will be more and more innovation that will happen in that space, where even though these data we will see these data processing tools doing what they do best for the application, I think they will all be operating on the underlying same unified data layer, and some of that will be inspired with all some of the innovations that already happened. Some of that will be inspired with the AI and how AI will influence some of the aspects of that, because that changes from the experience point of view. And I think some unification where customers don't have to worry about leveraging the best tool for the best job, and without worrying about isolation or compromising on the security underneath, is the future I see.
Yeah. Hey, Michael, can I pivot a little bit here? I think this is an important topic, but there's one that I don't want to walk away without talking about. And I think, Kamal, you'll have a lot of interest in talking about this. I know we only have like 4 minutes left, but that's free tier offerings with your open core product. Using SaaS to get it in front of more customers, open source already has great reach. But if you're looking for building an open core product, one of the things I really want you to be thinking about is using a SaaS to offer a free tier to your customers, to show them, to demonstrate the value of what you're adding as an open core product. I think if we have any open core owners, producers right now who are thinking about building a SaaS and sort of on the fence of like, well, yeah, I could just deploy this into customer accounts and not manage it. The ability to, create a product to demonstrate the value of that to your customers. And I mean, I've seen numbers like Kyle Poyer, who's a SaaS expert, says there's something like maybe a 5% conversion from free tier products into paid products in SaaS. And that may sound daunting, but that simply means you're putting this in front of lots of people and creating lots of opportunities for them to try your software, to see the value of having it managed. You're increasing that community of people who follow your open core product and your open source product, giving them more opportunities to try this. And it may lead to conversions within their companies. It may lead to them simply taking the software and carrying it across their own software journeys and using it as they go to different companies. SaaS really provides you a really interesting opportunity. And getting started, Omnistrate can get you started really quickly. This isn't a plug for Omnistrate, but simply build that SaaS product as quickly as you can. Get your control plane running, get it in front of customers, build that free tier, because that free tier can potentially lead to a product-led growth strategy, right? Where you can get inside a company in front of a single developer, that developer introduces it to their team introduces it to their department, and it bubbles up within large enterprise customers. And this is one of the huge advantages that deploying as SaaS for an open core product has. I know it's a little bit different than a lot of the topic we've been talking about today, but I think it's really important that anyone who's building open source products and building open core on top of them think about how they're going to deploy their software. Kamal, let me hand it off to you because I think you're also pretty passionate about this point as well.
Yeah, I mean, 100% agree, and I think I would add actually one small element to that, which is how much cloud marketplaces play a role in conjunction to free tier of pricing or tier. In conjunction to play in the overall story of the SaaS, right? It opens up from the distribution channel point of view, and makes allows some of the bigger enterprises to unlock, right? And that is complementary to, in some ways, to the free tier, because free tier, you're building the product-led growth that strategy, and you're getting people to try out your product and see without having to worry about understanding your software and managing your software, and quickly get to see the value of it. And then on the other hand, you're now taking care of or unblocking all the procurement challenges and all the from the enterprise point of view to be able to adopt a particular technology, and you're shortcutting that. And so in the way I see that both of them are in a lot of ways reducing the friction for end customer to actually adopt your product. That's in short. Given this, we don't have much time left. I just want to also, Michael, if you want to weigh in at the last minute.
No, I think that's a perfect transition, Bill. And one of the things that, going back to my Microsoft days, we learned kind of the hard way quickly, which is a lot of times someone's deciding how to build an application. It's a developer who's under a time crunch, and he might be making that decision at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. And if he can go somewhere and click and have your solution just work for them, and they might not be a Kubernetes expert. They might be an AI expert. They might be or they might be really good on database, or they might not know anything about database. And so abstracting the pieces of it that they don't need to know, just to allow your software to fill that need. And that decision is often made by whatever they can get to, because they're under a time crunch and they don't want to call a salesperson. They don't want to, they don't want to call their IT group and say, hey, gee, can I have permission to use? If your solution is there in front of them and fits the need and it's good enough, sometimes the technology that's used is a good enough solution. And so ensuring that your technology is available whenever the person that happens to be making that architectural decision is ready. And everyone on this call is a developer who has their roots in open source. That means that everyone on this call knows what I mean. Those decisions are often made at 2:00 in the morning on a Tuesday. And once it gets to the point where it's good enough, no one goes back in and deletes it. Things stay. And so the free tier and marketplace and just reducing the barriers to access your technology is incredibly important to ensure adoption of your project moving forward. So with that said, I think, Taylor, we're pretty close to time, so I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. We're right at the hour. So thank you to all who asked questions. This was a great discussion, great involvement from people in the community, and looks like it was pretty well attended. So thank you, everyone. We hope you learned something really interesting today, and we will see you at the next Cloud Native Live. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.